Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Organise 2020, the TUC's Festival of Discussion, Debate and Ideas on Building Our Trade Union Movement. In case you've somehow got lost in the Zoomiverse and are wondering where you are, you're at the Organise 2020 session called The State of Unions and the Challenges we Face. My name is Carl Roper. I work for the TUC as the National Education and Organising Manager, and I'm going to be your host for this opening session. Before I introduce our great panel of speakers, can I just take you through how we're going to run the session? Please be aware that this session is going to be recorded and might be posted on YouTube at a later date. Second, you'll see in the chat that my colleague has posted the TUC's Code of Conduct for Organise 2020. Please take note of this and adhere to all the guidelines on behaviour and language that we would expect of each other if we were all together in person. Anyone not adhering to the Code of Conduct will be removed from the session. We want this session to be interactive, so you will have a chance to ask questions. To do this, please use the Q&A button, not the chat, because that's the one we will monitor for questions. If your question is directed at a particular panel member, please mention them by name. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can, but my apologies in advance if we don't get to your question. Finally, we did ask everyone registering for all the sessions of Organise 2020 if they had any accessibility requirements, and we didn't receive any. That's why there is no sign-in or anything of that nature at this session. We obviously can't make any adjustments during the session, but we can speak afterwards to see if there's anything we can do to provide you with the session in an accessible format. Okay, so that's just the end of the opening kind of announcements. I just want to introduce our speakers. Firstly, we have the General Secretary of the Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union, Sarah Woolley. Sarah has made the journey from rank and file member to activist to union full-time officer and was elected to lead her union last year. She's the first woman to be elected to the post and started her term as General Secretary just this month, and we wish Sarah all the very best in her new role. Secondly, we have Mike Clancy, the General Secretary of Prospect. Mike has been a trade union officer since 1989. He was re-elected as Prospect General Secretary in 2016. He's a member of the TUC General Council and the Executive Committee, and is also a member of the ACAS Council. And completing our panel is Roger McKenzie, Assistant General Secretary of Unison. Prior to taking up his current post in 2010, Roger was the Unison West Midlands Regional Secretary. And before that, he was a TUC colleague of mine, worked for the TUC for 4 years as the Midlands Regional Secretary, and then for 4 years as the Race Equality Policy Officer. And Roger is also a member of the TUC General Council. We've asked each panelist to speak to the subject of the session, the state of unions and the challenges we face, for up to 6 minutes. After they've all spoken, we'll get to your questions. Please don't wait until everyone has spoken before you post a question. Otherwise, there'll be one of those horrible, deathly cyber silences, and I may have to fill the gap with some more doom-laden statistics. So just before I ask Sarah to kick off, I just want to kind of set the scene with some doom-laden statistics. The latest trade union membership figures were published at the end of May and contained really good news for the movement. Membership during 2019 was up by 91,000, and that means that over the last 3 years, membership of unions in the UK increased by over 200,000. And there are now 6.4 million union members in the UK. This increase was driven largely by membership amongst women workers, and that went up by 170,000. And there are now more women carrying a union card than at any time since 1995. Union membership increased the public and the private sector by 74,000 and 17,000 respectively. And the proportion of all workers who are union members is now 23%. The number of workers covered by collective agreements increased, and unionised workers continue to be better paid than workers who aren't. But as welcome as all of this news was for our movement, we shouldn't let it disguise some of the structural problems in respect of where we are organised and who our members are. Firstly, too high a proportion of union members are in the public sector when most workers are employed in private sector jobs. Out of the 6.4 million union members in the UK, some 3.7 million are in the public sector, but just 2.7 million are in the private sector, and compare that to the 17 million non-members working in the private sector. And you compare this 17 million non-member figure to the average size of a bargaining unit that unions applied for recognition for last year was just 281, and 60% of those bargaining units were for less than 100. Union density in the private sector is just 13%. Secondly, too many union members are near the end than they are the beginning of their working lives. Whilst less than 1/4 of current union members are aged under 34, more than 40% are aged 50 and over. And density amongst workers aged 16 to 24 is just 8%. While some of the sectors in which many young people start their working lives, hotels, restaurants and hospitality, and retail outside of the big supermarkets and some of the high street chains, are virtual union-free zones. So the big challenge is, how do we build membership in the private sector? How do we secure the future of the movement by increasing the number of young workers who carry a union card? And perhaps most importantly of all, given the size of the challenge, how do we organise to scale and increase membership each year by thousands and tens of thousands? So I'm just a humble worker in the vineyard of trade unionism, and I don't have to answer these questions. So let's move to the leadership of our movement and see if they can have a bash at it. So first of all, we're going to hear from Sarah, then Mike, then Roger, and then yourselves. So I'm really pleased to welcome Sarah Woolley from the Bakers, Food and Allied Workers Union. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Carl, and thank you for all the congratulatory messages already in the chat box. Thanks to you all that's taken the time to type that out. We've seen a steady increase in membership as a trade union movement, like Carl's just said, over the last few years, and even more so through the pandemic over the last couple of months. But we've still got a long way to go, representing less than 1/4 of all workers, and even less in the private sector is definitely not good enough. And we represent at the Bakers Union workers in the private sector in the food industry. We find that too many employers in the private sector use anti-union rhetoric, anything from you don't need a trade union because we're here to support you, to trade unions are just trouble causers, right through to in some cases threatening to sack people for joining trade unions. And I remember a couple of years ago being stood on a gate in the early hours of a freezing winter's morning in the dark, being told more than a few times by people, please don't talk to us because they're watching and I need to keep my job. And they're kind of the challenges that we're facing. Small and medium-sized businesses seem to be the least likely place to find a union branch. And I'm not sure generally if that's because they don't have a large potential or whether it just takes up too many resources to target a few of those at once, but it's definitely something that we need to focus on going forwards, as they are most likely to be places that need our input to ensure that people are safe and treated in accordance with their employment rights. Young workers are still a massive challenge to the trade union movement. Typically, if they are from a trade union family, they don't really know what a trade union is, other than what they see in the mainstream news. And let's face it, that does us absolutely no favours at all, because they are not our friends at the right-wing media, and they don't understand why they should have to pay to be in a trade union either. There's an expectation that you leave school and your first job will be crap, low paid and awful work. But it's okay, because you'll move on to something better afterwards. We need to amplify the message better that it's not okay, that it doesn't matter whether you're in a job for a few weeks to tide you over to something better, or for years. You should be treated with dignity and respect and be paid a decent wage for the work that you do. Because the reality is, if you accept poor treatment in your first job that might be a Saturday one at McDonald's, you're less likely to challenge it in future employment because it becomes ingrained with you. And we've done some great work with McDonald's and Wetherspoons workers around this, engaging predominantly young workers around problems and issues that affect them, and then empowering them to stand together and demand better, with some success. You know, most recently with Tim Martin's furlough turnaround, and I know other trade unions have done similar, but we need to do more of that. Most young people don't understand the need for a union bureaucracy. They don't understand that there's a rule book, and that even though that those rules have been there since before they were even thought of, we have to follow them, and they are the things that rule us. They don't understand the language that's used in them either. In some cases, in ours, I'm not sure I do, you know, it's very archaic, and they don't care for the rules around being able to go out on strike and the number of hoops that you have to jump through to get there. They simply want to resolve the issues that they're facing quickly and successfully, which in reality is no different to older workers. And they also don't need us as trade unions telling them what we think their issues are, but they need us to listen to them and support them in fighting against their injustices. And that's why we've had so much success in McDonald's and Wetherspoons. There are too many people in recognised workplaces who aren't union members. And this is something we picked up a while ago and we're working on. Too many of our branches have nowhere near 100% density. And that leaves a massive potential for us internally, never mind looking externally to greenfield sites. So we've been focusing on our established branches, looking at how can we increase the membership within them, and working with the branch secretaries and what reps we've got on site. Looking at, do we need more reps? Do we need more union presence? You know, for example, open days, road shows. Do we need better notice boards and communications? And we're focusing on making sure the foundations are in place to enable the reps and officials to work on increasing the membership and engaging activists, because it shouldn't just be about paying your subs. You should be active in your workplace and your branch as well. And we've made some headway, but we know we've still got a lot of work to do. And we also know that in our industry, like many others, that those most in need of a trade union are the least likely to be in one, for a number of reasons, as I've outlined prior to this. And that's why initially we began the fast food campaign in the beginning. We became aware of the poor conditions people were working in, the harassment, the abuse, the 0-hour contracts, and knew we had to do something to help. But that's just one area of the economy. There are so many more that need the same attention that aren't getting it. Stronger Unions said a few years ago that there's a problem in London and the South East in terms of membership levels. And I know we have noticed internally that that's a fair reflection of our membership levels still in that region. Other than pockets of memberships in McDonald's and Wetherspoons, where we've had a long, sustained, focused campaign, our membership has slowly fallen in that area. And we seem to struggle to engage members to become representatives and activists, despite the hard work that's put in by the full-time officials and existing branch reps. The movement, I've nearly finished now, Chair. The movement is ageing, as are the representatives, as Carl mentioned, and officials within it. I know that the TUC, led by Carl's done a lot of work around this area, but the situation is not changing. I'm hoping in our union that, with me being a relatively young General Secretary, it will inspire our young members to become more active and stand for positions, and as a result drawing more young members. And only time will tell. But one thing is clear: if we don't change the demographic and encourage a new wave of leaders, both locally and nationally, we're going to fade away. And that'll be a tragedy, especially on the backdrop of a Tory government who doesn't care about working people as much as they say that they do. And I'm hopeful that, you know, there's been a lot of negatives in the pandemic, but I'm hopeful one of the positives will be that some of the lessons that we've learned, especially around being more digitally aware as a movement, will help us reach out to those that have never thought about engaging with us before, have never thought about attending a branch meeting or even heard about a trade union. They'll see what we do, they'll want to be part of it, and they'll join. And that will be something largely positive that comes out of the pandemic, that we come out of the other end with a larger movement. Thank you.
Thanks, that's great. Really, really great stuff from you. Thanks very much. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to ask Mike Clancy, General Secretary of Prospect, to address us. Thanks very much, Mike.
Thanks, Carl, and good afternoon, everyone. So just a few words initially about Prospect and our vet sector. We've been growing for about the last 4 years, and that's accelerated in the last 6 months. In particularly in relation to the way we've reached out to a lot more members directly in the last 3 months in particular. So we've been growing for some time. We've got a large public sector membership, particularly in civil service, BBC, and to a degree in education and children's services. But the vast majority of our members are in the private sector. So that's what I'm going to really talk about in particular here. And the fastest growing area of the union is self-employed and freelance, particularly in the creative sector, but not just exclusively there. We've got a lot of freelance and self-employed members more generally, and we do a whole range of other things for them beyond the normal conventional union stuff that you would do for people in direct employment. So I said to Carl that I won't cause uproar, but I will be challenging. And I hope I've got a few friends at the end of it, or made some new friends. So first of all, the private sector is different to the public sector. So let's not organise the private sector like it is the public sector. We've got a density issue in parts of the public sector, but we've got a massive problem in the private sector. Let's also be honest, the 13% of membership that we've got in the private sector, quite a lot of that has got a public sector lineage. And whilst it might be some decades ago that it came out of the private sector, there's no doubt, given that you had established union recognition in air traffic management, transport, energy, and other utilities generally, we've been able to hold on to that more easily when it's been in the private sector. But we've got plenty of examples where we've not been able to move as successfully beyond those old boundaries, even where we brought membership with us all that time ago, as those businesses have evolved in the private sector. So actually, our private sector reach in the new private sector, as I might describe it, is an even bigger problem than the overall statistic of 13% represents. Now, like it or not, when you're organising in the private sector, you've got to understand economics, markets, changing human resource practices. You've got to understand cost pressures, as well as our agenda of fair shares, diversity and inclusion, and progression for everyone on merit. And the reason you've got to do that, understand those other challenges and the challenges that the employers have, is that the staff we're representing and those we aspire to represent absolutely understand these pressures on a daily basis. And even more so now, people are acutely aware of the state of the businesses that they're in, furloughed from, or might hope to work for in the future. So it takes a razor-sharp approach to the underlying analysis if you're going to get private sector companies to pay attention to what you've got to say. You've got to equip your representatives so that they can meet managers on an equal basis, that they can understand the economics of the organisation, they can understand the financial data, and they can be good ambassadors and leaders amongst the workforce whose future is absolutely dependent upon it. And I've got big questions, even in my own union, about how well we're doing that and need to do it for the future. Now, here's a challenging thought. I think people come to work to succeed. And I think our messaging needs to lead from that point. I think they want unions to solve their problems, not just to create the environment of a dispute. Been really interested in the last few months. Unions at a national level have been part of the reassurance strategy of government. We've had more engagement with government ministers in 3 months than perhaps I've had in 30 odd years. And they come to us because we've got a granular understanding of the workplace. They have needed us, not to say they're going to keep in that mode in the future, and we've cast a significant influence. You've heard unions mentioned at the erstwhile 5 o'clock conferences. We talked to the unions. We had Michael Gove even nominates Francis and Len as good friends, which suggests that anything is possible in the unprecedented circumstances of the last few months. The way I tend to tone it with our members is, we want to help you get on, but be in no doubt we can help you get even. But leading with a positive message about growth in the workplace and personal success, I think is something we need to reflect carefully upon across the movement. I agree with Sarah, we've got a free riding issue, but what are we actually saying to individuals which would encourage them to join? Now, I think what you've got to do, particularly in the private sector, is market union membership, but with union principle absolutely underpinning that. You've got to tailor messaging. You've got to get very clear messages for branch, sector, and different environments, because people are interested in what they're interested in, not always what we want to tell them, and it certainly isn't a one-size-fits-all. We've got to look like a movement that's got fluidity, that's got the agility, that understands the different environments and doesn't just come up with one set of messaging. And I think what you've got to do is personalize to collectivize. I believe strongly in building back from the individual to the collective. And we've got to understand that the agenda has been individualized. Now, I was on an HR call yesterday with some opinion formers who are actually recognizing that there's a new generation for HR, that there is a collective space in which you need to engage with your workforce, with your employee reps, and with your unions. Now, that tends to be where you have them. But I think there is a real opportunity here, because we will not build back better if we have business as usual. And there's an opportunity here for trade unions. So personalize to collectivize. And finally, I'd say this: we have to think about the fact that employee relations across the UK has degraded. We have HR practitioners who do not understand unions, do not understand collective relationships. So when we talk about sectoral bargaining, enterprise bargaining, and a whole range of other things we need to do to rebalance power in the economy, we've got to bear in mind that they don't understand it. And what they don't understand, they're likely to close their minds to pretty rapidly. You know, I've often said unions are a bit like your kids. You love them till they get an opinion. And then you find yourself justifying all sorts of things that previously you could just say, please do it. But everyone knows as a parent, you have a better conversation if you actually engage the people around you. And we've got to win that argument with the private sector, that they'll have better business, better commerce, if they're safe, engage with their workforce, and engage with their unions. And that's how we turn 13% into maybe 30% over the next 5 to 10 years. Thank you, Carl.
Thanks, Mike. That was great. And I think certainly organising the world as it is our starting point rather than as we would want it to be. And I think that raised some really, really key issues for us, particularly in that big challenge of organising in the private sector. Okay, last but not least, our final speaker before we get to the questions, and we've got 11 questions. I've tried to answer a couple already, which were to do with stats, and one about whether you can be sacked to being a union member. Technically, you can't, but you know there's a real world out there as well. So, without further ado, I'd like to ask Roger to make his contribution. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Carl, and thanks to Mike and Sarah for their really thought-provoking contributions, actually. So Unison, we're seen as we are a public services union, but that doesn't mean to say that we're a public sector union. Something like 200,000 of our members work in the private sector, but also, you know, we have thousands of our members who work in the community and voluntary sector. So add that to what we see with our kind of traditional public service membership, our traditional public sector membership, and you see the breadth of what Unison is trying to organise. We currently have members in something like 150,000 workplaces throughout the UK. We have something like 40,000 employers where we've got members, and there's probably a similar number of employers where we should have members and we don't. There's probably a similar number of workplaces where we should have members and we don't. And that's the scale of the issue. If you agree with me that visibility is one of the key things for organising within a trade union. So visibility, the more visible you are to non-members, the more likely it is they're going to join. The more visible you are around the workplace, the more likely it is that people will stay with the union. And also, I should say, want to get involved. Because for me, that is one of the critical issues for us. When you look at Unison's membership for the last 27 years of our existence, we've been really steady. Despite all the attacks on austerity, we've been about 1.3 million for the length of that 27 years. There's been a few blips up and there's been a few blips down. What we're in at the moment is quite a blip upwards. Our membership growth has been phenomenal for obvious reasons during this pandemic. Where we, and I think a lot of unions, are struggling, and I think for me this is the biggest challenge. How can we get more people doing something within the union? And I very deliberately put it that way. I didn't say as activists, and I didn't say as stewards or health and safety reps or any of the traditional positions that are held within unions, but people just taking some ownership of their union, so they don't see it as that the union is somebody else, the union is something else to be done to them, rather than them taking an active role within the unions. Because for me, that is one of the biggest challenges that we need to address. How can we get more people doing things? How can we get more people to take an active role, for example, around the social care sector? When I first joined the trade union movement in the late 70s, early 80s, we had the home care, social care was predominantly public sector. I used to belong to a branch of the National Union of Public Employees that was a social services branch. And one of my first jobs was to go around as a shop steward and represent and help organise workers who worked in care homes. Something like 90+% of care homes now are private sector run. And I think that's an issue for us. So our membership, we've had a massive decline in that membership, but actually what has really happened, there's been a massive fragmentation of public service work. Actually, there's been a massive fragmentation of work across our membership. So whether you're in the public sector, private sector, or the community and voluntary sector, there's an additional problem as well. You could start off work in the public sector, the traditional public sector. You could be tupied over, you could lose your job, you could end up moving into the private sector. You could then lose your job, be tupied across, whatever, into the community and voluntary sector. You could find yourself moving round and round and round in what is sometimes quite a vicious circle. You could also find yourself one day working for a private sector company in, say, a hospital. And as maybe a cleaner or somebody who organises the food for people, catering assistant within a hospital. That private sector company could also have a contract in a school 20 miles away and could suddenly decide that they want to move you from the hospital to a school 20 miles away, maybe, to deliver that similar service. So the reason for me raising that is I think we have to be much more flexible, much more nimble in the way that we organise work. And I think Mike was right about this. We've got to be much, much more nimble about the way that we just, instead of having a solid structure that everybody must fit into our structure, why don't we look at what people actually need for them? Not just to, so that it's convenient for us to be able to represent them with an employer, but actually that encourages them to take an active role within our organisation, take part in our democratic bodies within our organisation, because every union will know, pretty much every union is in the same position, is that the level of participation in our democratic structures is going down and down. And I think we have to take real measures around that. So I would say this, Carl, that for me, one of the biggest challenges for us, certainly for Unison, is not particularly about recruitment, because I think we are very, very good at recruitment. And when you can stay at 1.3 million, and when you have to recruit something like 143,000 new members every year just to stand still, and we do that and we grow most years, I think we can be regarded as pretty good at recruitment. The key for me is how you build power in the workplace that's really going to make a difference for working people in their workplaces. And for me, you do that by having more people taking an active role within the union. So for me, the big challenge for the whole movement is how can we get more activity within our unions? How can we persuade more people to take an active role? Because if we have got this fragmented level of workplaces that we have, it seems to me you cannot organise that with full-time staff and just expect that full-time staff are going to be able to do that. Actually, I think we are more powerful. We are in a better position to engage with employers, whether they're in the public sector, private sector, or the community and voluntary sector, if we've got more people on the ground standing up for their workmates and being there visible on behalf of their union. So for me, Carl, that's the key challenge. Let's look at what we can do to get more people doing things within our trade union movement. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. And once again, I think that's a really good point. I mean, one of the unique selling points of the trade union movement is that one of workers coming together and representing and supporting each other. And I think whatever the solutions are to this, it has to contain that element, because that is something that is very precious and very important in the movement. Okay, well, thanks to our speakers, and thanks to the discipline of our speakers to keeping to time. We've got a pretty decent chunk of time to get through the questions. I've been answering some of the more easier ones that are more like factual, where a TUC bureaucrat can answer them. But we've got a couple. I think we've got a fair few that we'll put through. The first one I'm going to ask on is this is a very current one, because one of the companies currently in everyone's eye as we kind of emerge out of lockdown is Wetherspoons. And there's a question, Sarah, my understanding, this is from Ian, that the Bakers Union are urging trade unions not to boycott Wetherspoons. Is there anything that union customers might do lawfully if they're frequenting one of those establishments? Sarah, do you want to have a bash at that?
Yeah, can do. Yes, we're asking people not to boycott Wetherspoons. Whilst we appreciate the annoyance towards Tim and around his behaviour at the beginning, the only people that are impacted by boycotting are the workers that can't afford to lose hours and can't afford to lose wages. So what we're asking people to do is, if you go in, just talk to the workers about joining a trade union. Talk to them about the letter that went out at the beginning of the whole pandemic to Tim Martin that picked up traction, that turned the furlough scheme around, and just talk to them about the importance of standing together collectively to improve their terms and conditions.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Next one, I'm going to let Mike, Roger, and then Sarah have a bash at in that order, and it's from Antonia, who from a second name I think is from one of our trade councils in South London. Do we as unions put enough resource and priority into organising for growth in membership, and what's the balance between that important task and supporting existing members? Mike, do you want to have a swing at that one?
Okay, the answer is no, we don't. So why is that? First of all, by international comparison, the British trade union movement, UK trade movement, is undercapitalised financially. Trade union membership in this country, compared to most other jurisdictions, is actually relatively on the cheap. So unions here start on a lower financial base. Secondly, we try to do everything we've done before and then bolt on things that we need to do to look more contemporary, rather than have an honest conversation about what we need to stop doing because it's not actually bringing benefit to the members, the representatives, or the organisation as a whole. We also then need to think about the difference and the blend and the balance between digital organising, digital reach, and what I might call ground organising. There's a space in the future for both. But we've seen in the last few months that we've probably reached more members, certainly in my union, than we've ever reached before by using the remote working platforms. Equally, I am not an advocate of the death of the office. I am certainly not an advocate of continuing to do employee relations exclusively from remote screens. I think employers will use that against us to reduce our advocacy and persuasion. And also organising will have to be rethought as the nature of our workplaces change. So we don't put enough into organising, and we have finite resources. But the only way you'll do that is to reprioritise within the union. And that means you've got to bring the democracy with the staff together to agree what are our real priorities for the future. And then it will be being clear about what your digital reach needs to be. How many people, 85% of our members join through the web. But how you push them there is a mix of digital and ground. And I think some of the balances between those two will change. The skills needed for activists and representatives will change. How do we map that for the future?
Roger?
Well, I had a problem with the system, so I couldn't hear the question. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'll give it again. Do we as unions put enough resource and priority into organising for growth? And what's the balance? How do we achieve a better balance between that and the resources we put into supporting existing members?
Right, thanks, Carl. I mean, I think it depends what you mean by organising for growth. If organising for growth means recruitment, then we put a hell of a lot of effort into recruitment, and we monitor recruitment daily, actually, within our union. And we have a real sophisticated kind of approach across the whole union for measuring where it is we need to go and what it is we need to do. But growing on its own, I don't think is enough. I think we have to grow with strength at the roots. And I think that strength at the roots is about organising and the approach to organising. And what I was trying to get across in my contribution earlier on was the real difficulty of being able to do that by the kind of methods or the approach that we've adopted, all of us, not just Unison, I think, the approaches that we've adopted over the years. I think Mike is right in a sense about the way that we've been able to reach more people with the kind of digital platforms that we've made use of. And maybe there's some people in the movement who are pretty scared about using those at first, or have been over the years, and now being forced into using them. And, you know, I'm attending branch meetings now of, you know, about 200 people and so on. Whereas before I might go to these branches and there's like 2 or 3 people there. And, you know, I mean, I'd like to think that the 200 people is because I'm turning up, but it's not. It's because it's easier for people to access those meetings. So I do think we have to have a look at how these platforms help us to not just grow in number, bearing in mind what I said before about visibility, but also grow in strength. So what is it that we need to do? I think that the growing in strength bit, and somebody said on the chat, I should answer my own question about how do we get more activists. I do think it is about having more. I think it is about the visibility. The more people see us, the more likely it is they are that it's something that they feel is worth taking part in. So if you've got 150,000 workplaces like we have, how the hell do you get people? How do you get a load of organisers out to 150,000 workplaces? Well, you do use some of the digital platforms, but the people, there's a load of people who are already in those workplaces. And that's where I think we have to put the emphasis on getting more people active and doing things within the union. And that takes work, and that takes investment, and the priority investment, I think, by the union.
Okay, Sarah, do you want to have a swing at that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really disagree with any of Mike or Roger's comments. I think we are in the perfect time at the minute to kind of take a step back, review what our priorities are and how we move forward in this new age. You know, somebody mentioned about how do we not go back to how things were, how do we have a new normal going forward, and now is the perfect time to do that. We do need to focus more on organising, but you know, the strength, the structure of branches needs to be there as well, because if you're okay kind of organising and recruiting 100 members from a workplace, but if there's no reps on site to represent them, the full-time officials that job is organising spends all the time supporting the members rather than the reps on that site. So it needs to be a combined approach, using our new digital world that we're in, using face-to-face discussions, making sure the structures are in place at a workplace level so that then we can move on and organise in another place as well.
Okay, Sarah, thanks. Right, Mike, I'm going to put this one to you from Bora Octax. For Mike, how can we maintain the so-called softly approach to union organising when we have evidence that it's crises in workplaces that increase membership?
I think I've got the question. So I think we just lost Carl for a second. I'll pick up the question. I read it in the chat. So I don't think those two are exclusive, and in fact, in some environments, the two can be almost happening at the same time, depending on the nature of the issues. So I think you start with a premise that you're there to work with the employer, to collaborate, to solve problems. But the crucial thing for any union is your independence. That comes from the membership subscription. That sometimes we need to remind people. We can speak truth under power because of the subscription that allows us to fund staff, fund the union, support representatives. Now, what you've got to be alive to is that a collaborative relationship is not a cozy one. If it's not a relationship of equals or tips into being a relationship where the equality is eroded, that's where you're more likely to get to a dispute. And you need to keep in the employer's mind that you're not an extension of the HR department, even when you're collaborating. Because otherwise, what value are you to people in terms of your independence? So that's why I talk about getting on, supporting the getting on progress, but always having that capacity and the employer locating in the employer's mind that you can help people get even, that you are a potent force collectively if they are foolish enough to want to test that. So yes, I do think obviously periods of dispute statistically demonstrate spikes in membership, but actually I think the statistics often also demonstrate the spikes in membership are temporary, and what you build more durable membership from is a longer term invested relationship where you're demonstrating to the potential members and those you have that you're influencing for the longer term.
Okay, does anyone else want to have a go at that, Roger or Sarah?
I kind of agree with Mike that you can have a balance between, you know, sometimes we have to fight the employer because there are some really bad employers out there who treat our members like there's something that's scraped off the bottom of their shoe. You know, they really treat our members badly. So we're expected to by our members to stand up and fight for them, right, or with them. But there are also some employers who we have worked really well with over the years. One of the things that we pride ourselves on in Unison is our partnership working within the NHS in particular. It's outstanding partnership. That doesn't mean to say we don't have disputes in the NHS. Of course we do, but there are plenty of mechanisms in place that allow us to do both. I mean, I think it depends on what's happening to the balance that you have between whether we're fighting or whether we're, you know, or whether there's kind of concord taking place. But always you've got to have an eye, I think, for the long-term relationship that needs to exist within workplaces, that you can't throw it away by having a dispute for the sake of it, you know, because, you know, our members are low paid in the main. You know, they can't afford, you know, they're struggling to put bread on the table, many of our members anyway. So having a dispute just because there's some ideological reason to have a dispute is really disrespectful for our members. But sometimes our members are forced into saying enough is enough and something needs to be done about stuff. And that's what we have to be there to do. But as I said, we have to be there to maintain a long-term relationship with those employers as well.
Okay.
Mike and Roger covered that. I'd just be saying the same again.
Okay. Well, my internet connection dropped, and I've lost some of the well, most of the questions that were on. One that did strike me was that I will put to the panel. That was actually a question. How do unions make better use of digital in terms of how we access, recruit, organise and communicate with members? TUC's got a digital lab project, and I know a lot of the stuff that the McStrike has been using online. So Sarah, do you want to have a go at that, how unions can make better use of digital? Maybe to answer that question I posed at the beginning of how do we organise to scale?
Yeah, I think we need to incorporate digital platforms into our toolbox of what we use to organise in general. You know, somebody has put face-to-face is best, and I do think that face-to-face is best, but now we have the opportunity. You don't have to look at NEU. They had a Zoom call of 20,000 people, the biggest trade union meeting that had ever been had. face-to-face now means that I can be sat in Wakefield talking with you guys scattered around the country, and we can still organise, we can still talk to people about what trade unions are in a face-to-face way. And I think we need to not be scared of utilising our digital means. You know, we've mentioned about it being an ageing kind of movement, and people could be reluctant to think, right, well, I need to go onto a laptop and to be able to talk to somebody. But I think we just need to kind of make it as easy as possible, because for a lot of people it reduces the barriers. You know, I was a single mum growing up with my little boy, and going to a branch meeting on a Friday night was very difficult for me, you know, if I didn't have childcare. But now I could join a branch meeting on Zoom, you know, and still be involved in my branch and still have a voice. I think we've got some massive opportunities with digital going forward that, you know, we need to make sure that we're not going backwards, and once the pandemic's over, just go back to how things were.
Carl, you're on mute.
Can people hear me? Yeah, sorry, I'm having Wi-Fi issues. Okay. What I think we'll draw to a close soon. But there's another question about younger workers. Younger members of staff don't expect to stay for long in any one job, and so often prefer to ignore rather than challenge mistreatment. How can we do this? And I would add to this, given two members of the panel on the TUC General Council, how can we as a trade union movement better handle when members leave jobs in unionised workplaces? Because we know that when they leave a unionised job, unless they know they're going into a job where the same union represents them, they leave the movement as well. And what are the very practical steps we can do with the TUC and with unions to make people, to enable people to keep trade union membership, whether even if they're unemployed for a period of time, or if they move from a unionised job into a non-unionised job? I'll go Mike and then Roger for that one first.
Okay, Carl, I think it depends on the nature of the labour market you're dealing with and the segment of it. So I just wanted to emphasise something which may not be so obvious, but when it comes to organised and self-employed and freelance, and the creative sector operates on the basis of those sorts of occupations and has done for decades, the normal notions of recognition, workplace and union activity just don't apply. And actually sometimes that's helpful, because frankly we know that trade union recognition as a concept is feudal. You know, we have to rely upon the employer be prepared to recognise us. Doesn't apply there. But notions of union solidarity do apply. So for example, what we do is we organise the rate for the job in a range of crafts. And I've been astonished by the levels of solidarity that people will show to keep the rates up in their craft, their occupation, to maintain the proper qualifications and standards, and to show also intercraft solidarity. And frankly, the engagers know that if they try and pay less, they won't get the labour. Now think about that. That's going right back to the basic principles of how trade unions came in a while back. And also that means that we're not dependent on the employer recognising us. So actually those people's identity of their union membership come from their craft and the union's brand, as opposed to a workspace. And I think there's more of that ahead, and there are points and principles in some of that learning that we can apply elsewhere. Let's remember, freelance and self-employed people, a lot of them have fell through the gap of the government support in the last few months. A lot of people are going to be reconsidering what they want to do in the labour market in the future. And they felt a chill wind in relation to that lack of support. So there's some big issues to play out there. Beyond that, we've got to be honest with each other and supportive of each other within the TUC, that if we're making union membership more portable, less dependent upon workplace, then there will be more movement between unions. And that's something we need to resolve cooperatively through the TUC, because the biggest issue is to keep people in the union movement as the overriding principle, so that when they do leave a workplace, they don't leave the union, or they don't leave a union. Now, I think we need to do more in that respect than I think we've done before, and some of our previous notions of how we handle those things probably need review.
Roger?
Yeah, we're looking at a kind of membership passport system within Unison, because we know, I mean, what I was trying to describe earlier on, where people are moving around from public sector big public sector employers, round to a private sector employer, round again to a community and voluntary sector employer. It is not a stable situation, but also on top of all of that, we've got, it might surprise a lot of people to know that we've got thousands of our members in Unison who are self-employed, because many of the agencies that are around instruct, the only way you can get onto an agency's books is by becoming self-employed. Now that breaks down the kind of traditional way that we've been trying to organise public sector workers for years and years. So we've had to look at things differently. So it's a couple of things. Firstly is that membership passport thing, to look at ways of making sure that membership of Unison is more portable across the public, private, community and voluntary sector areas that deliver public services. I do accept Mike's point, though, that we've got to look more collectively as a trade union movement about when people are moving across different sectors and into areas where maybe one other union is more predominant. And I think we have to look more sensibly at areas like that. But we're looking also at, we've also already got a Unison organising app, because one of the things that we need to make sure happens is that people, you know, in these 150,000 workplaces plus that where we've got members, we've got to make sure members have access to the union, but also we have access to our members as well. And one of the ways we do that is quite an interactive app. We also need to make sure that the people who are doing things within our union are able to exchange information quickly. We've got a system, a digital system for doing that within the union, which is called the organising space, which allows people to exchange documents really quick. So it's a kind of Facebooky type thing, really, but people are able to exchange information really quickly in real time, you know. So it's not like we'll send out a request and then in 2 months' time we might get an answer to it. They can really get good exchange of information. So I suppose what I'm saying, Carl, is that I think we have to use some of the technology that's available to us to enable people to maintain their union membership. But that membership has to mean something. And the difficulty that we have is how we can make sure that they're not just paper carriers, you know, membership, you know, carriers around from one workplace to another, but how we make sure we follow people around and engage them in activity in whatever workplace that they're in. And for me, that's the big challenge that we still need to address as a movement.
Okay, thanks, Roger. And Sarah?
I think Roger's right. It can't just be a case of, we'll just keep you on the membership, we'll just keep you on the books. It's not enough just making it easy to go from check off to direct debit, you know, by a push of a button or whatever. You've got to make sure that there's purpose there, and give them the support. So if say, a Greggs worker from a recognised employer goes to a McDonald's store that we've not managed to reach out to yet, to keep the membership, how do we support them in that workplace to be engaged, to set up their own branch there and keep that contact with them? I think we definitely need to work together as a movement to make sure that there's none of this, you're pinching our members, or, you know, we're going to poach your members. We need to kind of get rid of that. We're keeping people in the movement and growing the movement as a whole, and to a certain level, the kind of which union a person belongs to becomes irrelevant in that, because it's about the union movement. And just to touch on the original question, because I know Mike and Roger have kind of covered most of Carl's, around how do we kind of get people to not just leave a workplace because something's happened and get them to challenge it. I think we need to shout louder about the groups of young people that are doing something about it and the changes that they have made. So without kind of going back over the McDonald's stuff and the Wetherspoon stuff, there are examples of young groups of workers that have come together that have said, we're sick of this boss that's bullying us in our workplace and we're going to take action against it. And using those, as well as TGI and Deliveroo, as examples to other young people that, you know, you don't have to accept poor terms and conditions and crap just because you're there on a part-time basis working on a Saturday for a few months over the summer. You deserve better. And I think it comes, you know, I know Unite do a lot of stuff in the schools around the trade unions and what they are. And I think it does come down to education and the knowledge of your rights, which we've still got a lot of work to do. But nobody should be going to work and just expecting, well, I'll just go